Red Dwarf, Infinity Welcomes Careful Drivers by Grant Naylor. Read by Chris. Part 1. Your own death and how to cope with it. Describe using diagrams where appropriate the exact circumstances leading to your death. Saunders had been dead for almost 2 weeks now, and so far he hadn't enjoyed a minute of it. What he wasn't enjoying at this particular moment was having to wade through the morass of forms and legal papers he'd been sent to complete by the Department of Death and Deceased Rights. It was all very well receiving a 5-page booklet entitled Your Own Death and How to Cope with It. It was all very well attending counselling sessions with the ship's metaphysical psychiatrist and being told about the nature of being and non-being and some other gunk about this guy who was in a cave but didn't know he was in a cave until he left. The thing was, Saunders was an engineer, not a philosopher, and the way he saw it, you were either dead or you were alive. And if you were dead, you shouldn't be forced to fill in endless incomprehensible forms and other related nonsensica. You shouldn't have to return your birth certificate to have it invalidated. You shouldn't have to send off your completed death certificate accompanied by a passport-sized photograph of your corpse signed on the back by your coroner. When you're dead, you should be dead. The bastards should leave you alone. If Saunders could have picked anything up, he would have picked something up and hurled it across the grey metal room. But he couldn't. Saunders was a hologram. He was just a computer-generated simulation of his former self. He couldn't actually touch anything except for his own hologrammatic body. He was a phantom made of light, a software ghost. Quite honestly, he'd had enough. Saunders got up, walked silently across the metal-grilled floor of his sleeping quarters and stared out of the viewport window. Far away to his right was the bright multicoloured ball of Saturn, captured by its rainbow rings like a prize in a gigantic style hoopla game. 12 miles below him, under the plexiglass dome of the terraformed colony of Mimas, half the ship's crew were on planet leave. No planet leave for Saunders. No R&R for the dead. He caressed his eyelids with the rough balls of his fingers, then glanced back at the pile. The mind-bogglingly complicated hologrammatic stasis application form, accident claims, pension funds, bank transfers, house deeds. They all had to be completed so his wife his widow Carol, could start a new life without him. When he'd first signed up, they both understood he'd be away from Earth for months on end, and obviously things could happen. Mining in space was dangerous. That's why the money was so good. If anything happens to me, he'd always said, I don't want you to sit around mourning. I want you to meet someone else, someone terrific, and start a new life without me. What a stupid, fat, dumb thing to say. The kind of stupid, fat, dumb thing only a living person would ever dream of saying. Because that's what she was going to do now. Start a new life. Without him. Fine if he was dead. if he'd just taken delivery of his shiny new ephemeral body and was wafting around in the ether on the next plane of existence, fine. Even if there was no life after death and he totally ceased to be, then again, absolutely fine. But this was different. He was dead, but he was still here. His personality had been stored on disk, and the computer had reproduced him down to the tiniest detail, down to his innermost thoughts. This wasn't the deal. He wanted to start a new life when he was gone, not while he was still here. But of course that's what she'd do. That's what she had to do. You can't stay married to a dead man. So even though she loved him dearly, she'd eventually have to start looking for someone else. And she would sleep with him. She'd go to bed with him, and hell, she'd probably enjoy it. Even though she still loved Saunders. She would, wouldn't she? She'd meet Mr. Terrific and have a physical relationship. Probably in his bed. His bed. Their marital bed. His bed. Probably using the 3 condoms he knew for a fact he'd left in the bedside cabinet. The ones he'd bought for a joke. The flavoured ones. His mind ran amok, picturing a line of lovers standing strawberry-sheathed outside his wife's bedroom. Hologrammatic tears of rage and frustration welled up in Saunders' eyes and rolled hologrammatically down his cheeks. He smashed his fist down onto the table. The fist passed soundlessly through the grey metal desk and crashed with astonishing force into his testicles. As he lay down in a fetal position, squealing on the floor, he wished he were dead. Then he remembered he already was. Saunders didn't know it, but 12 miles below, on the Saturnian moon of Mimas, flight coordinator George McIntyre was about to solve all his problems. Chapter 2. George McIntyre sat in the Salvador Dali coffee lounge of the Mimas Hilton and stared at a painting of melting clocks while he waited for the tall, immaculately dressed mechanoid to return with its double Bloody Mary, no ice. He couldn't stand Bloody Mary without ice, but he didn't want his shaking hand to set the cubes clanking around in the glass, advertising his nervousness when his visitors arrived. 5 minutes later, they did arrive, and McIntyre wished they hadn't. When he turned and caught sight of them, the heat left his body as quickly as people leave a Broadway first-night party when the bad reviews come in. There were 3 of them, big men. They each had the kind of build that looked stupid in a suit. Shoulders tiered from the neck, thighs like rolls of carpet, biceps and triceps screaming to be released from the fetters of the finely tailored lounge suits. The kind of bodies that only look right and natural in posing pouches. In suits, no matter how expensive, and these were expensive, they looked like kids who'd been forced into their Sunday best, all starched and itching. McIntyre couldn't shake the feeling that they were yearning and aching to get nude and start oiling up. They didn't say hello and sat down at his table. One of them took up both spaces on the pink sofa, while the other 2 drew up chairs from a nearby table and squeezed into them. The armrests were forced out into a tired V to the accompaniment of an uneasy creaking sound. McIntyre just sat there smiling. He felt as if he was sitting in the middle of a huge barrel of sweating muscle. He was convinced if he shook the hands with any of the 3, he'd immediately die from an overdose of steroid poisoning. He wondered, though not too hard, why one of them was carrying a pair of industrial bolt clippers. The tall, immaculately dressed mechanoid came up and served McIntyre his Bloody Mary. All 3 of the men ordered decaf coffee. While they waited for it to arrive, they chatted with McIntyre. Small talk, difficulties parking, the decor, the irritating music. When the coffee came, McIntyre pretended not to notice that they couldn't get their fingers through the cup handles. The man on the sofa lifted up a briefcase and fiddled clumsily with the lock. For a moment, McIntyre found himself feeling sorry for the man. Everything was too small for him. The briefcase, the coffee cup, the suit. Then he remembered the bolt clippers and stopped feeling sorry for the man and started feeling sorry for himself again. The case eventually sprang open, and the man took out a fold-out, 3-page document and handed it to McIntyre with a pen. McIntyre explained, apologetically, that it was impossible for him to sign the document. The 3 men were upset. George McIntyre left the Salvador Dali Coffee Lounge at the Mimos Hilton, carrying his nose in a Mimos Hilton Coffee Lounge napkin. Chapter 3. The 4 Astros paid the fare, leaving the smallest of small tips, and staggered through the jabbering cloud and up the steps into Los Americanos Casino. Lister flicked on the for hire sign and decided to take the hopper down to Central and back towards Mimos Docks. He slipped the gear into jump and braced himself. The hopper leapt into the air and landed with a spine-juddering crunch 200 yards down Downiston Avenue. The hopper's rear legs retracted into the engine housing, then hammered into the ground, propelling him another 200 yards. As it smacked into the tarmac 3-lane highway, Lister's neck was forced into the hollow base of his skull, further aggravating an already angry headache. The hopper's suspension was completely shot to hell. Lister began to wish he'd never stolen it. Hoppers had been introduced to Mimos 30 years previously to combat the ludicrous congestion which had blocked the Small Moon's road system so badly that an average Mamian traffic jam could last anything up to 3 weeks. People have been known to die of starvation, in particularly bad ones. Hoppers, which could leapfrog over obstructions and spend most of the time in the air, helped ease the problem. True, there were a fair number of mid-air collisions, and there was always the possibility of being landed on by a drunk-driven hopper, but by and large you reached your destination the same season as you set off. Lister watched with envy as another hopper overtook him with the easy grace of a frolicking deer. The next landing was the worst. The hopper hit a metal drain cover with such violence that Lister bit his cigarette in half, and the glowing tip fell between his thighs and rolled under the seat of his pants. Frantically he arched his body out of the seat and tried to sweep the butt onto the floor as the hopper leapt madly down the busy highway like a sick metallic kangaroo. Something was burning. It smelled like hair, and since he was the only thing in the hopper that had hair, it was fairly safe to assume that some part of him was on fire. Some part of him that had hair. He liked all the parts of him that had hair. They were his favourite bits. His eyes searched desperately for a place to park. Forget it. In London, people parked wherever it was possible. In Paris, people parked even where it wasn't possible. On Mimos, people parked on top of the people who'd parked where it wasn't possible. Stacks of hoppers, 3, sometimes 4 high, lined the avenue on both sides. A typical Saturday night on Mimos. The thick air hung heavily with the smells and noises of 100 mingling cultures. The trotters, Mimian slang for pavements, were obscured by giant serpents of human flesh as people wrestled their way past the blinking neons of casinos and restaurants, the on-off glare of bars and clubs, shouting, screaming, laughing, vomiting. Astros and miners on planet leave going wallet-bulging crazy, desperate for a good time after months of incarceration in the giant space freighters that now hung over the moon's shuttle port. The Earth had long been purged of all its valuable mineral resources. Humankind had emptied its home planet like an enema, then turned its rapacious appetite to the rest of the solar system. The Spanish-owned Saturnian satellite of Mimas was a supply centre and stop-off point for the thousands of mining vessels which plundered the smaller planets and the larger moons and asteroids. Smoke began to plume from between Lister's legs. Still nowhere to park. Traffic blared and leapfrogged over him as he skewed across lanes, fighting to keep control. In desperation, he grabbed the thermos flask lying on the passenger seat, struggled with the unfamiliar cap, and poured the contents into his smouldering lap. A hiss signalled the end of the cigarette. There was the second of delicious relief. Then he smelled coffee. Hot coffee. Piping hot coffee. Piping hot coffee that covered his loins. The pain had already hit him by the time he poured the bottle of upholstery cleaner he found in the glove compartment over his thighs. The hopper, now madly out of control, careered off the Mutual Life Assurance building, taking a large chunk out of the neon sign before Lister wrestled it back under control and, still whimpering in pain, headed towards the docks. The man in the navy blue officer's coat and the blatantly false moustache flagged down Lister's hopper and got in. 152nd and 3rd, he said curtly, and pressed the tash, which was hanging down on the right-hand side, back into place. "Going to a brothel?" asked Lister amiably. "Absolutely not," said the man in the blue officer's coat. "I'm an officer in the Space Corps." He tapped the gold bars on his lapel. "And I do not frequent brothels." "I just thought, what with 152nd and 3rd being slap bang in the middle of the red light area." "Well, you're not paid to think, you're paid to drive." Lister flicked on the hired sign, slipped the hopper into jump, and bounced off the district the locals affectionately called Shagtown. On the first landing, the officer's moustache was jolted almost clear off his face. "What the smeg's wrong with the suspend—" His head disappeared into the soft felting of the cab's roof. "Shen!" He bounced back down into the seat. "It's the roads," Lister lied. They stopped at a blue light. At right angles to them, 30 hoppers sprang forward like a herd of erratic gazelles pursued by a pack of wolves. "What's it like?" "What's what like?" said the man, feeling his jaw, convinced a tooth had been loosened in the last landing. "Being in the Space Corps, being an astro, I was sort of thinking of signing up." "Were you really?" Contempt. "Do you need any qualifications?" "Well, not exactly, but they don't just accept any old body. I doubt whether you'd get in." Lister felt for the fare enhancer button he'd found concealed under the dashboard of the taxi and added a few $pounds to the fare. The lights changed and they lurched off, conversation impossible. Lister had been trying to get off Mimas for nearly 6 months now. How he got there was still something of a mystery. The last thing he really remembered with any decent clarity was celebrating his birthday back on Earth. He and 6 of his very closest friends decided to usher in his 24th year by going on a Monopoly pub crawl around London. They'd hitched a ride in a frozen meat truck from Liverpool and arrived at lunchtime in the Old Kent Road. A drink at each of the squares was the plan. They started with hot toddies to revive them from the ride. In Whitechapel they had pina coladas. King's Cross Station, double vodkas. In Euston Road, pints of Guinness. The Angel Islington, mezcals. Pentonville Road, bitter laced with rum and blackcurrant. And so they continued around the board. By the time they got to Oxford Street, only 4 of them remained, and only 2 of the 4 still had the power of speech. His last real memory was of telling the others he was going to buy a Monopoly board, because no one could remember what the next square was, and stepping out into the cold night air, clutching 2/3 of a bottle of sake. There was a vague, very vague, poorly lit memory of an advert on the back of a cab seat, something about cheap space travel on Virgin's new batch of demi-lightspeed zippers, something about Saturn being in the heart of the solar system and businesses routing all the time, something about it being nearer than you think, at half the speed of light, something about 2 hours and 10 minutes, and then a thick, black, gunky fog. He'd woken up slumped across a table in a McDonald's burger bar on Mimas, wearing a pink lady's crimpline hat and a pair of yellow fishing waders, with no money and a passport in the name of Emily Birkenstein. What was more, he had a worrying rash. He was broke, diseased, and 793 million miles from Liverpool. When Lister got drunk, he really got drunk. He brought the hopper to a crunching halt on the corner of 152nd and 3rd, outside a garish neon sign promising girls, 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 and sex, sex, sex. "I understand," said the man in the navy blue officer's coat, surreptitiously re-gluing his moustache, "that there are some excellent restaurants in this area, offering authentic Mamian cuisine. "Look," said Lister, as he short-changed the officer, "do you want me to pick you up?" He really didn't feel like cruising around in a bone-juddering hopper for another fare. "I don't mind waiting." The officer glanced down the street at the various pimpy types with poorly concealed weaponry under their coats. "Fine. Wait around the corner." "How long will you be?" "Well, I'm led to believe the Mamian bladderfish is particularly exquisite, and I'd be insane if I didn't at least try the legendary inky squid soup. Plus, of course, pudding, brandy, cigars. Say 10 minutes? Call it 20 to be on the safe side." Lister took the hopper around the corner and saw his fare stride purposely towards a Mamian restaurant, paused outside, studying the menu, and then turned and walked straight into the building with the neon sign boasting "Girls, Girls, Girls" and "Sex, Sex, Sex." Lister locked the door of the hopper. He wasn't totally crazy about this area, safety-wise. He poured what remained of the coffee into the flask lid and lit a cigarette. What could be nicer, he thought, than smoking Spanish tobacco and drinking real Spanish coffee? Except, possibly, having your whole body vigorously rubbed by a man with a cheese grater. He was sick of this armpit of a moon. He spent the last 6 months trying to get the $800 he needed to buy a shuttle ticket home. So far he'd saved 53, and he was probably going to blow that tonight. Making money on Mimas wasn't easy. For a start, you needed a work permit, and Lister didn't have a work permit, because officially he didn't exist. Officially, Lister wasn't here. Officially, he was a space bag lady called Emily Birkenstein, hence his problem, which he attempted to solve by stealing taxi hoppers. Each evening, or at least each evening he felt in the mood, which turned out to be about one evening in 4, he'd hang around taxi hopper ranks and wait for the drivers to converge for warmth and conversation in a single cab. When he was convinced it was safe, he'd steal the rearmost hopper and bounce around the seedier districts of the colony, where few taxi cabs and absolutely no police ever went, and pocket the night's takings before abandoning the hopper at a busy rank back at Mimas Central. If he'd set about this hopper scam in a slightly more business-like way, the chances are he'd been off Mimas within a month. Unfortunately, he found Mimas so deeply depressing, quite the most hideous place he'd ever been, worse even than Wolverhampton, that quite regularly he felt compelled to hit the bars and drinking clubs and blow every single penny cent he'd saved. In some half-assed subconscious way, he felt if only he could get drunk enough, he was sure to wake up back outside the Mary Lloyd public house off Regent Street in London, trying to hail a cab to get a Monopoly board. Sadly, the price of alcohol in Mimas was so outrageously prohibitive, he could only ever buy enough Mamian sangria to get him in the mood to start drinking seriously before his money ran out, and he'd have to slope back to the shuttleport and hire a left luggage locker and sleep in it. Life, thought Lister, sucks. Outside the hopper, 2 pimps were having a minor disagreement about a girl named Sandra. It was brief, and for the most part friendly. It ended when the severed ear of one of the taller pimps had landed with a soft wet plop on the hopper's windscreen. Lister double-checked the door locks and suddenly found it important to read the A to Z of Mimas with fierce concentration. He was only half aware of the hopper rocking gently from side to side as the 2 men rolled on its bonnet. Suddenly there was another soft, wet plop, and a second slightly smaller ear joined the first one on his windscreen. What the hell's happening? Thought Lister. It's raining ears on my windscreen. He turned the wipers on and used his window wash. When the windscreen cleared, the ears had gone, and so had the pimps. Saturday nights on Mimas were wild. So wild, in fact, the Mamians had instigated an 8-day calendar so that everybody could have 2 Sundays to recover from Saturday night. Sunday 1 and Sunday 2, then back to work on Monday. Lister looked at the hopper clock. 40 minutes since the man in the blue officer's coat had gone for his meal. He slipped his taxi driver's nightstick up one arm of his jacket, stepped over the body of a dead, one-eared pimp, and dashed across the trotter towards the building with the girls, girls, girls sign.